The year was 216 BC, and the Roman Republic stood as one of the most powerful states in the Mediterranean world. For generations, Roman armies had marched across Italy, defeating rival tribes, expanding their influence, and building a reputation for discipline and determination. Roman citizens believed deeply in the strength of their legions. Their soldiers were known for their courage, their strict training, and their willingness to fight to the death if necessary. Yet despite this growing confidence, Rome faced a challenge unlike any it had ever encountered. A brilliant enemy commander had already inflicted several humiliating defeats upon Roman forces, and now both sides were preparing for a confrontation that would determine the fate of the war. The Romans were determined to end the threat once and for all. The Senate authorized the raising of an enormous army, gathering soldiers from every corner of the Republic. Veterans marched alongside young recruits eager to prove themselves. Thousands of citizens answered the call to arms, believing they were about to participate in a decisive victory that would secure Rome's future. The sheer size of the force inspired confidence. Many believed no enemy army could withstand such overwhelming numbers. The mood among the troops was one of anticipation rather than fear. They expected a hard-fought battle, but they also expected to win. As the massive Roman army advanced toward the plains near the village of Cannae in southern Italy, commanders felt that the balance of power had finally shifted in their favor. The enemy force standing before them appeared significantly smaller. Roman leaders believed they possessed every advantage. Their soldiers outnumbered their opponents, their resources were greater, and their determination was unquestioned. The decision was made to engage in a direct confrontation. What the Roman commanders did not fully understand was that they were facing one of the most gifted military strategists in history, a man who understood how to turn an enemy's strength into a deadly weakness. When the battle began, tens of thousands of Roman infantry surged forward in a dense formation. The ground shook beneath the weight of so many men moving together. Shields pressed tightly against shields, creating an unstoppable wall of bronze and iron. Roman soldiers pushed forward with confidence, gradually forcing the enemy's center backward. To those in the Roman ranks, everything appeared to be unfolding exactly as planned. Their opponents seemed unable to withstand the pressure. The enemy line bent inward under the relentless assault, convincing many Romans that victory was only a matter of time. However, what appeared to be a retreat was actually a carefully orchestrated maneuver. The enemy center continued to fall back in a controlled fashion, drawing the Romans deeper and deeper into the battlefield. The Roman formation became increasingly compressed as more soldiers pushed forward from the rear. Men found themselves packed shoulder to shoulder, leaving little room to maneuver. Yet the advance continued because everyone believed the enemy was on the verge of collapse. Few realized they were marching directly into a trap designed long before the first sword was drawn. At the critical moment, the enemy forces positioned on both flanks launched their attack. They moved inward with precision, striking the exposed sides of the Roman army. At nearly the same time, enemy cavalry that had driven off the Roman horsemen returned to attack from behind. Suddenly, the Roman legions found themselves surrounded on all sides. The realization spread through the ranks like a wave of terror. Soldiers who had expected victory now understood they were trapped. There was no clear path to retreat and no easy way to reorganize their formations. As the encirclement tightened, conditions within the Roman ranks became horrific. Thousands of soldiers were crushed together in a shrinking pocket of humanity. Many could barely lift their weapons, let alone fight effectively. The crowded conditions turned the Roman army into its own worst enemy. Men struggled to breathe as the pressure from those around them increased. Wounded soldiers fell beneath the feet of their comrades. Commands from officers became impossible to hear amid the screams, clashing steel, and chaos that engulfed the battlefield. The slaughter continued hour after hour. Roman soldiers fought desperately, displaying remarkable courage despite their hopeless situation. Small groups attempted to break through the enemy lines, but they were overwhelmed. Others stood their ground and fought until exhaustion overtook them. The battlefield became covered with bodies. Blood soaked the dusty plains of Cannae as countless lives were extinguished in one of the most devastating massacres of the ancient world. The enemy forces maintained their pressure from every direction, systematically destroying the trapped Roman army. By the end of the day, the scale of the disaster was almost unimaginable. Ancient sources report that as many as 70,000 Roman soldiers were killed. Thousands more were captured. Among the dead were experienced officers, respected senators, and countless veterans whose knowledge and skill could never be replaced. Entire communities across Italy would soon learn that fathers, sons, brothers, and husbands had vanished in a single day. The Roman Republic had lost not just an army but a significant portion of a generation. News of the catastrophe sent shockwaves throughout Rome. Citizens struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what had occurred. Never before had the Republic suffered such a massive military defeat. Fear spread through the city as rumors circulated that the enemy might soon march on Rome itself. The names of the fallen seemed endless, and nearly every family was touched by grief. The Battle of Cannae became synonymous with disaster, a warning of how quickly confidence could turn into catastrophe and how even the mightiest army of its age could be annihilated within the span of a single day. In the history of warfare, there are battles won through courage, battles won through superior numbers, and battles won through sheer determination. Yet some victories stand apart because they are achieved through intelligence so remarkable that they continue to be studied thousands of years later. The Battle of Cannae in 216 BC was one such event. It was not simply a Roman defeat, it was a demonstration of military genius that transformed a smaller army into an unstoppable force. The strategy employed on that day became one of the most celebrated tactical achievements in military history, proving that a brilliant plan could overcome overwhelming numerical disadvantages. The commander facing Rome understood his enemy better than Rome understood itself. He knew that Roman generals preferred direct confrontation and believed strongly in the power of massed infantry attacks. Roman armies were trained to advance aggressively, applying constant pressure until their opponents broke. This method had delivered victories for generations and had become deeply embedded in Roman military thinking. Rather than resisting this tendency, the opposing commander decided to exploit it. He designed a plan that would encourage the Romans to behave exactly as they always had, drawing them deeper into a situation from which escape would become impossible. Before the battle even began, every part of the battlefield was carefully considered. The arrangement of troops was unlike traditional military formations of the era. Instead of placing the strongest infantry in the center, the commander positioned troops that could gradually give ground under pressure. Behind them stood more experienced soldiers prepared to hold the line when the crucial moment arrived. On both flanks, elite forces were positioned with a specific purpose. Meanwhile, cavalry units were assigned roles that would prove essential to the success of the entire operation. Every movement was planned in advance, every unit given a task that contributed to the larger design. As the battle commenced, the Roman army surged forward with tremendous force. Tens of thousands of infantry pushed toward the enemy center, believing they could overwhelm it through sheer momentum. The opposing troops began to retreat slowly, creating the impression that the Roman attack was succeeding. To Roman commanders, this appeared to be the first sign of victory. Their soldiers pressed harder, eager to break through completely. What they failed to recognize was that the retreat was deliberate. The enemy center was not collapsing, it was bending inward in a controlled manner, shaping the battlefield according to a carefully crafted plan. The advancing Romans followed the retreating line deeper into the formation. As they moved forward, their own massive numbers became a problem rather than an advantage. More and more soldiers crowded into a narrowing space. The formation that had once seemed powerful began to lose flexibility. Troops in the rear continued pushing forward, unaware of the growing danger ahead. The Romans believed they were driving their opponents toward defeat, but in reality they were being drawn into the center of a giant trap. The battlefield itself was being reshaped around them without their realizing it. At the same time, fierce fighting erupted on the wings of the battlefield. The cavalry engagement proved particularly important. The enemy horsemen launched aggressive attacks against the Roman cavalry and eventually drove them from the field. This achievement was not merely a local success, it was a critical component of the overall strategy. Once the Roman cavalry had been defeated, the victorious horsemen were free to move behind the Roman army. Their departure from the flanks was not the end of their role in the battle. It was only the beginning of the decisive phase. As the Roman infantry continued advancing into the curved enemy center, the strongest enemy units stationed on the flanks began moving inward. These troops had remained relatively fresh while the Romans exhausted themselves pushing forward. Now they attacked the exposed sides of the Roman formation with deadly precision. The Romans suddenly found themselves under pressure from directions they had not expected. Their tightly packed formation made it difficult to respond effectively. Soldiers who had been focused entirely on the front now faced attacks from both left and right. The most devastating moment arrived when the victorious cavalry returned to the battlefield from behind the Roman army. Having defeated their counterparts, they rode around and struck the Roman rear. The trap was now complete. The Roman army was surrounded on every side. Front, rear, left, and right were all controlled by enemy forces. Escape routes vanished. Communication broke down. Units became isolated from one another. What had begun as a confident advance transformed into confusion and desperation as thousands of soldiers realized they were encircled. The effectiveness of this double-envelopment tactic was extraordinary. Instead of attacking the strongest part of the Roman army directly, the commander had manipulated its movement and used its momentum against it. The Romans had willingly advanced into the position that ensured their destruction. Their numerical superiority, which should have been an advantage, became a liability once they were trapped in such a confined space. Unable to maneuver or reorganize, they were gradually compressed into an ever smaller area where resistance became increasingly difficult. The enemy forces maintained control of the battlefield, methodically tightening the encirclement throughout the day. Military leaders across centuries would later study this battle in detail, fascinated by the elegance and effectiveness of the strategy. The double envelopment at Cannae became one of the most famous tactical maneuvers ever executed. It demonstrated the importance of planning, deception, discipline, and understanding an opponent's behavior. More than 2,000 years later, military academies around the world continue to analyze how a smaller force achieved one of history's most stunning victories by turning a battlefield into a carefully constructed trap and transforming strategic brilliance into a masterpiece of war. When the survivors of the Battle of Cannae began carrying news back toward Rome, few people were prepared to believe what they heard. At first, many assumed the reports were exaggerated. Defeats happened in war, but Rome had experienced setbacks before and recovered. Yet as more messengers arrived and more details emerged, a horrifying picture became impossible to deny. One of the largest armies ever assembled by the Republic had been destroyed. Tens of thousands of Roman citizens lay dead on a distant battlefield. Entire units had vanished. Senior commanders had fallen. The scale of the disaster was unlike anything Rome had faced in its long history. The Roman Republic had entered the battle with enormous confidence. Leaders believed that overwhelming numbers would finally crush their enemy and bring an end to years of humiliation. Instead, the opposite occurred. The destruction was so complete that it shattered assumptions that had guided Roman strategy for generations. Citizens who once believed their legions were invincible suddenly realized that Rome could be defeated. The enemy commander had not merely won a battle, he had exposed weaknesses within the Roman military system and demonstrated that even the greatest power in Italy was vulnerable to destruction. As the full casualty lists became known, grief spread across the Republic. Nearly every family was touched by loss. Fathers waited for sons who would never return. Wives searched desperately for information about husbands missing in action. Parents learned that entire groups of young men from their towns had been wiped out. The dead included experienced officers, respected senators, wealthy landowners, and ordinary soldiers whose names would never be recorded in history. The magnitude of the tragedy created a sense of collective mourning that extended far beyond the battlefield itself. The political consequences were equally severe. Rome's leadership suddenly faced a crisis that threatened the survival of the state. The Senate had lost members in the battle. Important military commanders were gone. Questions emerged about how such a catastrophe could have happened. Citizens demanded answers while fear spread through the city. The government was forced to confront the possibility that the war might no longer be winnable. Confidence in military leadership declined sharply as people struggled to understand how such an overwhelming force could have been annihilated in a single day. Rumors quickly swept through Rome and the surrounding territories. Some claimed the enemy would soon appear outside the city walls. Others believed Rome's allies would abandon the Republic and join the victorious side. Panic threatened to spread throughout the population. Reports from the countryside often exaggerated the danger, making the situation appear even more desperate. In times of uncertainty, fear grows rapidly, and many Romans began imagining the worst possible outcomes. The thought that Rome itself might fall no longer seemed impossible. The psychological impact of the defeat reached far beyond the city. Throughout Italy, communities that had supported Rome began reconsidering their loyalties. If Rome could suffer such a devastating loss, perhaps its dominance was not guaranteed after all. Some allies started questioning whether remaining loyal to the Republic was in their best interest. Others watched carefully, waiting to see whether Rome would collapse under the weight of the disaster. The defeat created an atmosphere of uncertainty across the entire region, shaking the foundations of Roman influence. Within the city, extraordinary measures were taken to maintain order and stability. The Senate worked tirelessly to prevent panic from overwhelming the population. Religious ceremonies were organized as citizens sought explanations and comfort. Temples filled with people praying for protection and guidance. Public officials attempted to reassure the population while simultaneously preparing for the possibility of further military emergencies. Every aspect of Roman society was affected by the consequences of the defeat, from politics and religion to family life and economic activity. The loss of so many soldiers also created practical problems that were difficult to solve. Rome depended heavily on its citizen soldiers to defend the Republic. The destruction of an entire generation of fighting men meant that replacements would be needed quickly. Yet finding enough trained and capable recruits was no simple task. Communities that had already sacrificed large numbers of men were now being asked to contribute even more. The burden of war became heavier than ever, placing enormous strain on both the government and the population. For many Romans, the defeat at Cannae became a deeply personal tragedy rather than a distant military event. Stories of bravery and sacrifice circulated alongside tales of horror and despair. Survivors described scenes of chaos, confusion, and unimaginable slaughter. Their accounts painted a picture of a battlefield transformed into a nightmare from which few escaped. These stories reinforced the growing realization that the Republic had suffered one of the greatest catastrophes in its history, a defeat so severe that it would be remembered for centuries. The shock created by Cannae lingered long after the battle itself had ended. Every new report seemed to reveal additional losses. Every passing day brought more confirmation of the disaster's magnitude. The confidence that had once defined Roman society was replaced by uncertainty and fear. Citizens who had expected news of victory instead faced the grim reality that one of the strongest armies Rome had ever assembled had been crushed, leaving the Republic shaken to its core and forcing an entire civilization to confront the possibility of its own destruction. In the aftermath of the Battle of Cannae, Rome stood at the edge of what many believed was total collapse. The Republic had suffered losses so severe that entire regions mourned simultaneously. Families across Italy waited for loved ones who would never return. The names of the dead filled conversations in homes, markets, temples, and public squares. Fear hung over the city like a dark cloud. Citizens wondered whether the enemy would soon march directly on Rome itself. The defeat had shattered confidence, destroyed one of the largest armies in Roman history, and left the Republic facing an uncertain future. To many observers, it seemed impossible that Rome could recover from such a disaster. Yet Rome possessed a quality that would prove more powerful than armies, wealth, or military prestige. It possessed resilience. Throughout its history, the Republic had faced invasions, rebellions, and defeats. Each challenge had tested its ability to endure. Now, confronted with its darkest moment, Rome refused to surrender to despair. Rather than accepting defeat as final, Roman leaders began searching for ways to continue the struggle. They understood that giving up would guarantee destruction, while perseverance offered at least a chance of survival. This determination became the foundation upon which Rome would rebuild. The Senate moved quickly to restore stability. Emergency measures were introduced to address the crisis. Public officials worked tirelessly to maintain order and reassure frightened citizens. The government recognized that panic could be as dangerous as any enemy army. Messages emphasizing unity and endurance spread throughout the Republic. Rome's leaders understood that maintaining morale was essential if the state was to survive. Every effort was made to prevent fear from overwhelming the population and undermining the Republic's ability to continue the war. One of the greatest challenges was replacing the enormous number of soldiers lost at Cannae. The Republic had already sacrificed tens of thousands of men in previous campaigns, and now another massive army had been destroyed. Despite these losses, Rome began raising new forces. Young men who had never expected to fight were called into service. Older citizens were asked to contribute. Resources were gathered from every available source. The process was difficult and costly, but the Republic remained committed to rebuilding its military strength regardless of the sacrifices required. Rome also demonstrated its resilience through its refusal to negotiate from a position of weakness. After such a devastating defeat, many states might have sought peace at any cost. Rome chose a different path. Its leaders understood that surrendering to fear would only encourage further aggression. Instead, they maintained their resolve and continued resisting despite the enormous challenges before them. This decision sent a powerful message not only to their enemy but also to Rome's allies and citizens. The Republic intended to survive, no matter how difficult the road ahead became. The lessons learned from Cannae also transformed Roman military thinking. Leaders began analyzing the mistakes that had led to the catastrophe. They recognized that overconfidence and rigid tactics had contributed to the disaster. Future commanders became more cautious when confronting skilled opponents. Rome gradually adapted its strategies, placing greater emphasis on flexibility, intelligence gathering, and avoiding situations that could lead to another encirclement. The defeat became a harsh but valuable teacher, forcing the Republic to evolve in ways that would strengthen it over time. Across Italy, Rome's allies watched carefully to see what would happen next. Some had expected the Republic to collapse under the weight of its losses. Instead, they witnessed a state that refused to yield. New armies appeared. New defenses were organized. Government institutions continued functioning despite the crisis. This persistence helped preserve important alliances and demonstrated that Rome remained capable of resisting even after suffering one of the worst defeats in its history. The Republic's determination inspired confidence among those who might otherwise have abandoned it. The psychological recovery was just as important as the military one. Citizens who had been consumed by grief slowly began to focus on the future. The memory of the fallen remained painful, but it also became a source of motivation. The sacrifices of those who died at Cannae reinforced the belief that Rome must continue fighting. Stories of courage and endurance circulated throughout the Republic, reminding people that their civilization had survived hardships before and could survive them again. This collective spirit helped strengthen the resolve of an entire society during one of its most difficult periods. Years passed, and the Republic continued adapting to the realities of the conflict. The enemy commander who had achieved such a stunning victory remained a formidable threat, but Rome gradually recovered its strength. New leaders emerged. New armies gained experience. Resources continued flowing into the war effort. The Republic's ability to absorb punishment and continue functioning became one of its greatest advantages. What had once appeared to be a fatal wound slowly transformed into evidence of Rome's extraordinary capacity for endurance and recovery. The story of Rome after Cannae became one of history's greatest examples of resilience. A civilization that had witnessed the destruction of an entire army refused to abandon hope. Faced with fear, it chose determination. Faced with defeat, it chose persistence. Faced with uncertainty, it chose action. The Republic's response to catastrophe revealed a truth that extends far beyond ancient battlefields. That the strength of a people is not measured by how they perform when circumstances favor them, but by how they respond when everything they value appears to be slipping away.